Well, hello everybody. This is Genesis study, and we're actually going to be in our 32nd segment of this study going through the book of Genesis, and that is going to put us in Genesis chapter 21. Now, before, if you've been listening to these have been part of a preaching series that I was doing at Christian Family Fellowship in Canyon City, Colorado. I'm no longer there. We have left Christian Family Fellowship to begin pursuing regions in need, our missions overseas ministry full time. But I still want to complete that series on Genesis as well as the Mark study, which some of you may be watching as well. All of these studies end up going overseas and being used in our schools and in different venues in several places really around the world. So we're just kind of transitioning from a preaching means of communicating to a more Bible study venue. So we're going to be in chapter 21, and we're going to be dealing in verses 8 on down through 21 and really talking about the story of Abraham sending Hagar and Ishmael away. Now, oftentimes we read through these stories in the Old Testament, in particular in the book of Genesis, which is where we've been for several weeks. And we kind of read through these stories very quickly, and we miss a lot of information. And if we're not detailed enough, we miss some important clues that help us understand the story. But if we get too detailed and we don't see the broad picture, the overall picture of how this small story fits into the big story, we begin to miss the forest for the trees. So we've got to have a balance here as we look at this story, trying to understand it as it fits into the much bigger and broader flow of the book of Genesis and then into the whole broad spectrum of the Bible itself. But we also need to be detailed enough that we pick up the clues that help us actually understand the story. So let me go ahead and read this account. This is Genesis 21 verses 8 through 21. Now, just by way of review, Isaac has finally been born. Okay, so Abraham and Sarah have been waiting for a son of their own that God has promised them, through whom God is going to fulfill the promise and the covenant that he has made to Abraham. And it's going to be through Abraham and Sarah's descendant, Isaac, that God is going to bring about eventually the Messiah. He's going to bring about his promises that he's made to Abraham through and to the descendants that will come forth now from Isaac. So he is the son of the promise. Now, recognize and remember that while Abraham and Sarah were waiting for this son to come, and there was a great delay, that Sarah had suggested to Abraham that he should go ahead and have relations with her servant Hagar, makes Hagar his wife, his second wife, and then have sexual relationships with Hagar so that she would bring about a son. In other words, Abraham and Sarah made this plan to bring about God's will their way. Okay, and that never ever works. And that story is found back in Genesis chapter 16. Well, Abraham followed his wife's advice. He did make Hagar his wife. He did have relations with Hagar, and she did conceive and gave birth to Ishmael. Okay, so Ishmael actually becomes Abraham's first son, but he is not the son of the promise. This is not the son that God has promised Abraham and Sarah. Okay, so they continue to wait, and finally in Genesis chapter 21, Isaac is born. Okay, and Isaac is born, and Sarah is nursing Isaac. And in verse 8 we read the child grew. So Isaac grew and he was weaned. So we've come to that point in his life when he's weaned. That could be anywhere from age 2 to probably age 5. Okay, so the child grew and was weaned, and on the day Isaac was weaned, Abraham held a great feast. But Sarah saw that the son whom Hagar the Egyptian had borne to Abraham was mocking. So this is Ishmael. Ishmael is now somewhere between 16 and 19 years of age. So um, he was 13 the year before Isaac was born, and that's when Ishmael and Abraham were circumcised. And then a year later, Isaac is born, and then Isaac is weaned, and so that again takes 2 to 5 years. So so we have Ishmael here somewhere between 16 and 19 years of age. Okay, and so he is mocking this child Isaac, and Sarah sees that, and of course that makes her very angry. And so verse 10, and she said to Abraham, get rid of that slave woman, that's Hagar, and her son, that's Ishmael. For that woman's son will never share in the inheritance with my son Isaac. Now, I think that gives us a little insight here, is that Abraham, and we're going to see this a little later in the story, is really soft toward Ishmael. He understands that the promise is to come through Isaac. But Abraham has an attachment to Ishmael as his first son. And so he's going to try to see the promise kind of come through both of these sons, and that's not to be. God wants that promise that he has made to Abraham, that covenant promise that he's made to Abraham, that he is going to bless all the nations through Isaac. He's going to bring about the Messiah through Isaac. The Messiah is going to be the fulfillment of the promise that's made in Genesis 3:15. And he doesn't want that promise to be compromised in any way, shape, or form. And so probably not realizing that Sarah is going to be used by God to make sure that compromise does not take place. Because she says, get rid of that slave woman and her son. For that woman's son will never share in the inheritance with my son Isaac. Verse 11, the matter distressed Abraham greatly because it concerned his son. So here's the idea that we see that Abraham has a special relationship, and certainly would, with his son Ishmael. And this is concerning to him that he's going to have to send him away. The matter distressed Abraham greatly because it concerned his son Ishmael. But God said to him, verse 12, do not be so distressed about the boy and your slave woman. Listen to whatever Sarah tells you, because it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. I will make the son of the slave into a nation also, because he is your offspring. So God promises Abraham that he is going to bless Ishmael, and that from Ishmael a great nation is going to come. Okay, so we have this promise made by God to Abraham that he is going to bless Ishmael. However, Ishmael is not going to be the son of the promise. Ishmael is not going to be the one by whom and through whom God is going to bring about his promises made to Abraham. Okay? But God is going to bless him. So remember, God's made a promise to Abraham that his son is going to be the father of descendants. He's going to have a nation come forth for him. So that means that God has plans for Ishmael. That's going to be very important as we continue on through the story. Verse 14, so early the next morning, Abraham took some food and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar. So the idea here is that he puts some food in a bag, and he puts some water in a skin, probably a goat skin, and he gives them to Hagar. He set them on her shoulders and then sent her off with the boy. Now it's interesting that we don't see anywhere where he sets some food or a skin of water on Ishmael's shoulders. It's only on Hagar's shoulders. So Hagar is carrying enough food for her and the boy that's not going to last very long, okay? Not from what she can carry, and one skin of water. So there's not a lot of water here, okay? And it's almost as though he purposely does not give Ishmael any food or any water. So what's kind of going on here? That seems like this is strange. I mean, you would think that Abraham, if he's going to send Hagar and Ishmael into the desert, would provide them both with food and both with water, or perhaps even send some of his men with them that could carry food and water, because they're going to be wandering in the desert and they're going to run out of food, and certainly they're going to run out of water. So he sets this bag of food on her shoulders, he sets this skin of water on her shoulders, and he sent her off with the boy. Now, don't be confused by the terms here, the boy. This is a Hebrew term which is talking about a young man, okay? So it's not signifying a child, it's not signifying a toddler, it's signifying a young man. Remember, Ishmael is somewhere between 16 and 19 years of age. She went on her way and wandered in the desert of Beersheba. So this has the idea that they don't know really where they're going. They don't have a landing place in mind. They're just wandering. So Abraham has sent her and Ishmael out from the family, out from the safety of their compound, and she and Ishmael are now wandering in the desert with a bag of food and a skin full of water that this woman, Hagar, is able to carry. Verse 15, when the water in the skin was gone, she put the boy under one of the bushes. Now, again, understand, this is not a child. This really is not even a preteen. This is a young man between the ages of 16 and 19. So again, boy is referring to young man. Why does she put him under one of the bushes? Probably because he has not been eating that food. That food has probably been eaten by his mother. He may have eaten a little bit, but probably he is deferring to his mom, making sure she gets what she needs. They've been sharing this skin full of water, and they have run out of water. Verse 15, when the water in the skin was gone, and he is probably suffering from lack of food and lack of water. And so he's weak, okay? So that's the idea here. Then she went off and she sat down about a bow shot away, as far as you could shoot an arrow, for she thought, I cannot watch the boy die. The idea, I can't stand to see my son die. So she knows he's in dire straits. He's dehydrated. He has not had enough water. He's not had enough food. And so he is dying. And so that's why she puts him under this bush into whatever shade she can find. And she sat there and she begins to sob. So this is a really bad situation right here. God heard the boy crying. So the boy's even crying. It's not the idea of a baby crying or a toddler crying or a young child crying. It's the idea of a young man in distress and desiring water, desiring help, and crying out for help. Okay, so God hears the boy crying, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, what is the matter, Hagar? Do not be afraid. God has heard the boy crying as he lies there. Lift the boy up and take him by the hand, for I will make him into a great nation. So the angel of the Lord says to Hagar, listen, lift the boy up. Now, that's not talking about just stand him up on his feet. It's probably talking about lift him up from his prone position, get him so he's sitting up, and take his hand, provide him with some comfort, and then the angel of the Lord, who probably is the pre-incarnate Christ, makes a promise to her and says, I'm going to make him into a great nation. Okay, he's not going to be the son of the promise as Isaac is, but God is going to make Ishmael into a great nation as well. Many people believe that Ishmael would be the father of the Islamic people, the Muslim people. Many people believe he's the father of the Arab race, okay, the Arab people. And so the Muslims in particular see Ishmael as one of their great prophets and actually believe that Muhammad, who is really the founder of Islam, is a descendant of Ishmael, and that he took all the things that Ishmael's people had revered and worshipped and combined those with a form of Judaism and put those together to come up with the Islam religion. So Ishmael certainly is a prominent person in Islam. So that could explain that I will make him into a great people, a great nation. Now, nation is the word ethnos in Greek. In Hebrew, it's talking about the same thing, a people group, okay? Then God opened her eyes and she saw a well of water. That's verse 19. So she went She went by herself. She didn't take him with him. She lifted him from his prone position, sat him up, held his hand, and then she sees that well of water, and she goes by herself and filled the skin with water, and she gave the boy a drink. Okay? And of course, this is beginning to revive Ishmael. God was with the boy as he grew up. He lived in the desert. He became an archer. While he was living in the desert of Paran, his mother got a wife for him from Egypt. So when Abraham sends Hagar and Ishmael away, they are in that southern part of what is now Israel, near Beersheba, and he sends Hagar and Ishmael south, and really probably south west, and they're wandering in the desert, and soon after getting this water, they begin to make their way toward Egypt, where she finds him a wife. Okay? So we go back to this story and we say, why does God give us this story? Why does God engineer these events in his providential sovereignty so that we see in Genesis 21 Abraham sending out Hagar and Ishmael into a very dangerous place, and Abraham really being distressed about that, but he does what the Lord tells him. The Lord said, do as your wife says and send them out, because my promise is not going to be fulfilled through Ishmael. Now, I think here that we are really seeing a test of faith going on in Abraham's life, in which God is telling him, send out your firstborn son into a very dangerous situation, and you're going to send him out without enough food and water to sustain him. Now that doesn't make any sense at all. That's dangerous. That seems foolhardy. It seems that Abraham is really sending Ishmael to his death, especially when he gives Ishmael no food and no water. He gives the food and the water to Hagar. So why would God be directing Abraham to send his firstborn son into the wilderness without enough necessities, basic life necessities of food and water to survive? Why would he be doing that, especially after making a promise to Abraham in verse 13, I will make the son of the slave woman into a nation also because he's your offspring? Why would God be doing that? Well, I think what he's doing is he is growing Abraham in his faith and in his trust, because when we get to Genesis 22, the next chapter, Abraham is going to really experience a far greater test of faith, which we will see next time. But we'll talk a little bit about it this time, but not go into great detail. So what we have in Genesis 21 is God getting Abraham ready for the test that's going to come in Genesis 22. So here, in a passive sort of way, Abraham is being instructed by God to trust him with Ishmael and to trust him with Ishmael's life. So Abraham is not being told to kill Ishmael like he's going to be told in Genesis 22 to kill and sacrifice Isaac. Here he's not being told to kill Ishmael, but he is being directed to send Ishmael into a position that very well could kill him unless God keeps his promise to preserve Ishmael so that Ishmael can become the father of a great nation of people. So you kind of see the picture, what's going on here. God is saying, listen, I'm going to make your son Ishmael into a great nation, but I want you to trust me enough to send him into the wilderness with his mother without enough food and water to sustain him, but I will sustain him. Do you trust me to care for this son of yours, which was born through your sin of not trusting me? Okay, remember, when Abraham marries Hagar, in order to have this son, it's because they did not trust God. Him and Sarah were not trusting God for the son God was going to promise. And so here in Genesis 21, God is saying, now will you trust me? Okay, will you trust me? Now there's something else going on here. I think there's some discipline going on here. This is a really rough choice for Abraham to have to make in obedience to God. And sometimes the sins of our youth, the sins of our past do come back in painful ways to bite us later on down the road, don't they? And we have to make some difficult choices, some difficult decisions because of sins we have made in our past. And God is calling us to a new road. And we do have to forsake relationships at times that we never should have got involved in. We have to forsake different things in life, perhaps, that we have involved ourselves in because of sin. Now, not all the time. But here in this case, God is saying to Abraham, you need to send Hagar and you need to send Ishmael away. And this is causing Abraham, I think, some great pain. But he's having to trust God that God is still going to bring good about through this forced separation. Now, why would God be having Abraham go through this test of faith in which Abraham has to learn to trust God with his eldest son by sending him into a predicament that very well could kill him? Because in one more chapter, Genesis 22, God is going to come to Abraham again. In verse 1, sometime later, God tested Abraham. He said to him, Abraham, here I am, he replied. Then God said, take your son, now this is Isaac, take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah, sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you. Well, now we're not talking about passive obedience, this idea of having to make a decision that will indirectly cause harm to Ishmael if he dies of dehydration in the desert. Here, Abraham is actually being commanded to take the life of Isaac by way of a sacrifice. So is Abraham going to trust God with the life of his son Isaac in this kind of situation? Again, God's made a promise to him that through Isaac the promise will be fulfilled. And here God is saying to Abraham, I want you to kill your son. Do you trust me enough to do what I say and know that I will still fulfill my promise? Well, Abraham learned that back in Genesis 21 when God told him to send Hagar and Ishmael away, and God kept his promise by persevering and preserving Ishmael. So that will lead us up into Genesis 22. Next time, the story of Abraham and Isaac when he is told to sacrifice Isaac at Mount Moriah. So again, can we trust God with our lives? Can we trust God with our loved ones? Can we trust God with that and those which are most important to us? Listen, if God makes a promise to you, God will always keep his promise, and you and I can trust God for all that he is promised to us and all that he will promise to us. In fact, it won't matter what we may be called to do in this life. God will always keep his promises. And that's what he wants Abraham to grow in and understand more fully, that he will always keep his promises. And he's leading him in this journey of faith, preparing him for this great big test in Genesis 22 by taking him through a smaller but yet very important test in Genesis 21. That's how God builds our faith. He does indeed challenge our faith, and he does indeed bring us along, and he does indeed bring greater and greater tests and responsibilities into our lives to help us grow and be stretched in our faith in him, to believe him and trust him and rely upon him to keep his promises. So maybe you've had one of those Abraham moments. I can assure you that if you're a believer, if you haven't, you will. So that's it for Genesis chapter 21, and we'll jump into Genesis 22 next time. God bless.